From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Today, an expert shares advice for parents on how to keep kids with cell phones safe.
There are all kinds of things that kids have to deal with today that we didn't really have to deal with in the same way.
We'll speak with the superintendent of Milwaukee County's Community Reintegration Center about her approach to rehabilitation. Plus, the DNR is looking for volunteers to help track the animals you see in your neighborhood.
We're interested in getting information on these species because they're all harvested species, and so that really helps us to be able to manage those populations in a sustainable way.
All that's coming up on Lake Effect, but first, here are today's headlines. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Thanks for joining us today. This year's class of high school seniors was born in or around 2008. That's 1 year after the release of the first iPhone and 4 years after the launch of Facebook. While this generation of students grew up online, they're increasingly heading into schools looking to ban cell phones. At least 19 states have banned phones outright in schools, and 16 more states are considering it, including Wisconsin. But setting boundaries for kids on technology and social media can be a little tricky. Enter Devora Heitner. She's the author of the book Growing Up in Public, which guides parents on how to handle social media's impacts on children's mental health, geo-tracking, and just awkward conversations. Heitner joins WUWM education reporter Catherine Kokel to talk about how to navigate a world of technology that feels like it's changed in the blink of an eye.
You opened the book by talking about a moment when you were a child at summer camp, and you and all the girls in your cabin decided to take your cabin photo wearing only your bras. So you took your shirt off. And you kind of opened the book by reflecting about how that photo didn't go anywhere after everybody chuckled about it at summer camp. I wanted to do a little bit of a thought experiment with you. What do you imagine would happen if a group of girls did something like that under the same circumstances at a summer camp today?
It's an entirely different situation. Even our camp yearbook was made by photocopied if you lived through the 90s and you remember zines. So even just the level of fidelity of the way that photograph was reproduced in the camp yearbook, and it was in the yearbook, but it was photocopied in black and white, so it was smudgy and blurred, and you can't really see our faces or our bodies very well. So the fact that it's a group of young women who are under 18 in our underwear in a photograph just becomes much less of a problem, right? Than it is now, where you have full digital fidelity, where also that the only people who had copies of that zine as well were, it was handed out at the end of camp to everyone, right? And other people did other funny and silly things. It was kind of a quirky camp, right? It was not a very typical place, because I'm sure there are some places where even in the 90s, they would have just shut that whole thing down. But the fact is, an image like that could travel in a really different way. It would have fidelity, in the faces of the people in the photograph could be recognized, and more and equally problematic, it could be shared much more easily and widely, right? Versus like handing it to 60 or 70 kids at the end of camp, and they're taking it home, and the only way they could distribute it would be to photocopy it again, which would further decrease the fidelity, right? And then send it to someone else. That was just a very, it's kind of hard to remember, even for me who lived through the 90s, but for anyone listening to this who, grew up sort of post the analog age and never had a photograph in your hand that couldn't be shared with someone else without going to the store to get a copy. It's hard to imagine how different it felt to distribute something that felt personal, because it didn't feel like such a risky thing to do. The challenge is, for today's kids, they may not have a sense of risk because images that circulate are so explicit, and we see that so commonly. And so they may not have a sense of like, oh, I'm breaking the law in Wisconsin, or I'm breaking the law in whatever state. by sharing this underage photograph of myself that's explicit, right? I might be breaking child pornography laws. I might be exposing myself to the threat of harassment, right? There are all kinds of things that kids have to deal with today that we didn't really have to deal with in the same way.
Yeah, that was such a powerful example because as someone who also lived through that age, I was like, oh my gosh, they sound like a riot. And then the education reporter brain in me said, oh my gosh, that would be on Snapchat in 10 minutes now. And, hundreds of people would have, like you mentioned, a high fidelity photo of this on their cell phones. And I just think about how quickly something like that could spread and embarrass the people who are involved. So, I mean, how quickly things have changed. That kind of wraps into this discussion about kids' mental health and social media, right? When you talk to kids about how they think about social media and how it impacts their mental health, what did they say?
Well, they definitely do talk about what you described. Kids will talk about people who are thirsty or craving attention, either by posting sort of more frequently than the average. And again, that's going to vary in terms of your gender and your age and your friend group. But like whatever the average is, the people who sort of post more than that might seem like they're craving attention. There are kids who, if they post something, might directly message certain people in their close friend group to like it or amplify it, to try to kind of get it going, to make it not necessarily more viral, but to kind of pick up that algorithmic attention. And none of us know exactly how the algorithm works, but some of that is happening. We know that two of the main social media apps that teens are using now, Instagram and Snapchat, which are both really popular, now have map features. So Instagram, probably copying Snapchat, which has had a map for a little while, have these maps where you can see where your friends are. And of course, you can opt out of being shared, which is a good thing because there's a huge risk in terms of your safety and sharing your location all the time. But just thinking about the emotional safety of the kid who can see where all his or her friends are, that's a very problematic situation, right? Because we already know that we're being left out some of the time. But again, back in the analog era, I might hear about a party later and I might feel a little bit sad, if I really might have wanted to be invited, but it's already happened. And potentially, if I'm hearing about it later, it's filtered through maybe kids I'm not even that close to. Whereas in the digital age, I can see my friends hanging out in real time, potentially without me. I can see photos in the moment, like literally that party could be going on right now, and I could be sitting at home looking at the pictures and the videos and feel bad that I wasn't invited.
I'm really glad that you mentioned the map features of Snapchat and Instagram because really interesting concept in your book, Growing Up Public, is geo-tracking kids or using apps like Life 360 or Apple's Find My Friends to keep tabs on them wherever they go. I think this is something that would have felt impossible or at least invasive to previous generations. Like your parent putting a homing device on you sounds kind of sci-fi, but it exists and it exists on a cell phone. Can you kind of summarize your advice to parents on geo-tracking and following your kids' location?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you can understand why people are excited to be able to track their kids' location. It appeals to our anxiety, and we live in a world where we hear about things happening to kids in schools. We hear about, kids being taken. We have so much worry about kids' sort of physical safety in the world. And, I'm a parent of a new driver, and a lot of my peers who have 16-year-olds who are learning to drive talk about wanting to be able to follow their kids when they're driving to know how it's going. Some people even monitor their speed. It's very important that we think about, is this going to cause more or less anxiety in the short and long run, right? Is being able to follow our kids healthy, or is it undermining their independence, undermining their sense of efficacy, undermining their belief that we trust them? I would especially say that it's important to really think hard and probably try to resist the urge to covertly track our kids. Now, if we're going to overtly track them and let them know we're tracking them, I would try to think about a time limit for that. Like, okay, it's the first month you're driving. I'm going to feel safer if I follow you, but then I'm going to turn it off or whatever. Or Alternatively, even for younger kids who parents may be tempted to follow on a watch or another device even before they have phones, teach kids what to do in the situation you think you're planning for. Like if you're following your fourth grader while they're walking 6 blocks to school, first of all, think about, do you really need to do that? Are there other adults around? Will the crossing guard help them out if they fall off their scooter? Like, do I really need to track them? But also think about, what are the skills in self-advocacy I need to equip my 8 or 9 year old with, so that I feel safer letting them do things like go to the library after school or play on the playground after school or walk home independently. Because I think sometimes we over rely too on the idea, well, I'll just track them with technology, as opposed to, I need to teach my kid who is a safe person to talk to if they get separated from me at the mall, if they get lost on a school field trip, if they do, see something or someone that needs help and they need to reach out for help, right? What can they do? And they don't necessarily need a phone for that. And so that's really, really important. And we don't need to be tracking them for them to accomplish that. So I think it's important that we don't use tech to kind of let us off the hook on teaching our kids survival skills, and that tech doesn't, especially as kids get older, undermine their sense of their own efficacy and their sense that we trust them. And yes, that might mean your kid can lie to you, just as I talked about in growing up in public, that I said I was sleeping over at my friend's house, and I was actually sometimes going to sleep over at her house, but I was also going to see Rocky Horror Picture Show, and that was against the rules. But if my parents had found out about that by tracking me, I don't think it would have ultimately been good for our relationship or my emerging independence, right? Some sense of, needing to fend for yourself and needing to figure out how you're going to troubleshoot if things go wrong is a really important part of growing up. Because I've even heard from parents who are tracking their kids in college, where they don't live at home, but they're tracking them to see if they're going to class. And I don't think you want to put yourself in that situation where you're noticing where the little blue dot is on your child's campus. At that point, I think it's really important to reach into your own hobbies and your job and your own, like your own life, and think about, what can I do with this anxiety that's not kind of overly focusing on, is my kid, moving around the campus in a blue dot in the way I expect.
Devorah Heitner is the author of the book Growing Up in Public. She spoke with WUWM education reporter Catherine Kokel. The Milwaukee County Community Reintegration Center, formerly known as the House of Correction, is the state's largest county correctional institution. Located in Franklin, people incarcerated at the facility serve misdemeanor sentences and return to our communities after less than a year. In recent years, the center has focused more on offering vocational and health programming to people incarcerated there, getting families involved and inviting audits of the facility from third-party observers. Chantel Jewell is the superintendent of the Milwaukee County Community Reintegration Center, and she joins Lake Effect's Sam Woods to discuss the center's approach to rehabilitation.
I want to start with some core facts about the Community Reintegration Center in Franklin, formerly known as the House of Corrections. First, how many people are in your care, and what is the average length of stay?
So today we have approximately 1,215 individuals in our care at the CRC, and we call it the CRC for short. And the average length of stay for individuals that are sentenced to the CRC is 100 days.
Is there a typical backstory of people in your care?
Well, typically, individuals that are sentenced to the CRC are sentenced on misdemeanor cases, meaning low-level cases, and they are serving a year or less.
This is a bit of an open-ended question, but I'm curious to see how you think about it. What would you say is the goal of incarceration?
The goal of incarceration is to change behavior, address the needs of whatever has brought an individual into contact with the carceral system, Overall, just in general, approximately 97% of individuals in a carceral setting, jail, prison, will return to the community. So it's important that we provide programming and opportunity that supports change, because that is how we will, in fact, create safer communities once individuals are released.
So you mentioned programs and opportunities. Can you expand on what those are at the CRC?
Right. So we try to make sure all of our programming is evidence-based practice or aligned with evidence-based practices. A long time ago, when I started in corrections way back in 1996, when I was trained, I basically did what my mentor told me to do. But shortly thereafter, there became a body of evidence to tell us what works in corrections, what types of things reduce recidivism. And so we try to make sure our programming is aligned with that. So that includes educational opportunities, job training, skills training, cognitive behavioral therapy, substance use disorder treatment, and those type of programs is what we have to offer at the Community Reintegration Center.
So you mentioned education, jobs, mental health, substance abuse, help as things that work when it comes to rehabilitating or getting someone ready to reenter society. On the flip side, you mentioned you have a long career in corrections. What have you seen that doesn't work?
Sitting people in jail without offering them any type of programming. And the research, in fact, tells us incarceration without any treatment doesn't produce long-term change.
I can imagine that you run into people who see punishment and punishment alone as the goal of incarceration, that these people committed a crime, they need to be punished, and that's why they are in prison. Do you find yourself having to change minds and explain that your goals are a little more complicated than that?
Sure. I find myself having to educate people on what needs to happen while individuals are in custody. The fact of the matter, especially those individuals at the CRC, they're going to return to the community. So it's a matter of, how do you want individuals to return to your community? I would assume better and not creating more victims. But then there are those who may have been a victim of a crime or experienced. A family member may have experienced some type of victimization and may feel like these people are in jail, so they don't deserve these opportunities. And for us, it's about, again, I'll say it over and over, it's about helping individuals produce long-term behavioral changes so that they don't get out and create more victims or continue being involved in criminal activity. And that is how we create safer communities.
So we aired an interview on Lake Effect that I did with Wisdom, Wisconsin, and it was about their campaign to provide free video and phone calls to those incarcerated within Wisconsin. And the interview outlined how people incarcerated in Wisconsin foot the bill for staying connected to loved ones, often leaving them and their families in debt once they get out. Can you tell me about how you ensure that people in your care stay connected to loved ones while they're inside?
Sure. Under my tenure, we've done a number of things. One being that they do have free phone calls and free video visitation in Milwaukee County. We feel like it's important to keep people connected to their families. Under my leadership, we were also able to open up our visitation center. Hadn't been opened over a decade. Sheriff Clark shut it down. We've also hired a family outreach coordinator. His whole job, he is the liaison between the families and the residents in our care. So someone may call and say, I'm concerned about my son. I haven't heard from him in X amount of time. And that person will actually go do a wellness check or say, hey, call your mom. She's worried about you. And then another opportunity, through a grant, we were able to open up a family visitation center. And so that was to serve our residents, the non-incarcerated parent, and the children, because the evidence tells us that family distress is a driver of recidivism. So we want to help to facilitate those broken familial bonds, because when someone becomes incarcerated, they're not the only people impacted. If they have a family, they're impacted as well. Then we have a literacy links program where parents are able to stay connected to their children through reading and promoting literacy, and they're able to go on a video visitation and read a book with their child, or do homework help, or send a recorded tape of them reading with the children. So we like I said, we try to stick pretty close to the evidence, and so we know that family distress is one of those top drivers of recidivism.
Do you find that families are typically eager to take part in this process?
We do not have to persuade family members to stay connected to their loved ones. As a matter of fact, I wasn't sure when we opened visitation that people would take advantage of it, simply because now we have the video visits and you don't have to drive all the way to Franklin, but our visiting stays full. So people are eager to stay connected to their loved ones.
So I want to talk about transparency. So have you allowed third parties, and this can be community groups, this can be other government agencies, to inspect conditions at the CRC on a regular basis?
Yes. So we've done a number of things where we've voluntarily let people come in and audit the work that we're doing. One was the National Commission on Correctional Healthcare. That is the gold star of healthcare in any correctional facility, and we've been accredited twice under my leadership. We also have Prison Rape Elimination Act, where we get an audit from the Department of a Department of Justice auditor every 3 years. And then we also have an annual jail inspection through the state of Wisconsin.
So when I've done interviews or reporting on jails and prisons in the past, staffing is often an issue that is brought up, particularly when the story revolves around substandard conditions at a jail or prison. Before getting into how you have addressed staffing at the CRC, can you explain generally the connection between fully staffing prisons and better conditions for those who are incarcerated?
Sure. Staffing shortages result in a lot of overworked employees. And so sometimes when individuals are overworked, they may tend to make mistakes. It's never ideal to have people working 16-hour days.
Now back to the CRC. When it comes to boosting staffing, what have you seen that works? Is it just offering higher pay and that's it? Or is it a little more complicated than that?
We have not quite figured out what works. We did boost the pay. And what that did for us was got us a greater pool of applicants. But once you get through the screening process, that doesn't necessarily translate into a lot of hires, although we have a lot of applicants. We are working on culture. Having been a correctional practitioner for 30 plus years, culture is very important, creating a culture of professionalism, a culture where people can grow and they can thrive in their careers. And so we're very fortunate at the CRC where there's a lot of opportunity for growth. You know, we have a number of supervisory positions that people can grow into. I just spoke to new recruits today before I came, encouraging them to treat the CRC or this opportunity as more than a job, but look at it as a career and create career pathways for individuals to grow in the industry.
Tell me more about culture, like how you think about culture at the CRC, both from the point of view of staff and from the point of view of people in your care.
So in terms of staff, I don't have an institutional background. I came from community corrections. And so when I got there, I noticed that my staff do a lot of things well in terms of security, but I wanted to help them to grow in other things. So we're bringing on things like crisis intervention, just equipping them with more tools to help them be more effective in their roles. And so that was something that I don't think staff were necessarily accustomed to, or elevating programming. So there's always been programming, but it's probably programming on steroids now. And so just communicating how we're going to move forward, that I don't see us as law enforcement. We are a corrections organization. And we've done things in support of that, such as changing language. We don't refer to anyone as an inmate or an offender. They are residents. They are part of the larger community. And so these are people that just have had some challenges. And so we're here to help them get back on track. But we are not the police. So we're not going to behave like the police. And so that was a bit of a shift in thinking for some of my staff. A lot have embraced the change, the name change, the House of Correction to the Community Reintegration Center. And for me, it's more than a name change. Our behavior has to align with who we say we are. The name change is aligned with our mission and vision. And so we want to make clear why we exist, And so sometimes for tenured employees, change can be difficult. In terms of our residents, I think that they are getting more opportunities than they have historically gotten. We are intentional about staying connected to our community partners, so there's a smooth transition back into the community as we reintegrate people. We want people to be successful. We don't want to see that revolving door of people coming in and out. This job is not easy. A lot of people look at it and may think it's easy, but we are the gravity of the work. We are responsible for lives. Not only staff staying safe, but keeping our residents safe who come in with a number of challenges. When I say we, jails, prisons are the largest de facto mental health hospitals. So we are seeing people with that come in with significant mental health challenges that are higher risk than historically we've had to deal with. So that's a shift for us.
So a phrase you just used really stuck out, that jails and prisons are the largest de facto mental health hospitals in the state. Can you say more about that?
Sometimes when people misbehave or engage in certain behaviors, oftentimes due to their mental health conditions, sometimes there isn't anywhere to put them but jail. And so we end up with a population that we weren't necessarily equipped or trained to deal with. So we brought in additional training for our staff. Like I said, the crisis intervention training. We have a special dorm for individuals who have a hard time functioning in general population because of a mental health condition. And so they get a little more attention in our facility from the mental health practitioners, and we have specific programming to help them do better.
Chantel Jewell is the superintendent of the Milwaukee County Community Reintegration Center. She spoke with Lake Effect Sam Woods earlier this year. Did you know you can listen to Lake Effect as a podcast? Search for Lake Effect wherever you get your podcast to download and listen on demand. Still to come, we'll tell you how you can help out the DNR by sharing the wildlife you see. More to come on that in about 15 minutes. But first, we'll hear from a Milwaukee teen who leaned into her spirituality to create a space for her peers as they navigate traumatic experiences in the city.
Our prayers don't have to be perfect. We don't have to sound like each other. Everybody is going to talk about different things. We don't have to shout. We don't have to cry. God just wants us to have a simple conversation with him. And I just really wanted to highlight to youth that we can pray over each other and that we could also pray over ourselves too.
That's coming up on Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. 17-year-old Zoe Chambers has a wealth of leadership and advocacy experience for her age. She's involved in school and community extracurricular activities, such as Student Council, the Big Sister Little Sister program, and the Superintendent Student Advisory Council. She's involved in Milwaukee's theater scene, and she was Miss Juneteenth 2024. Chambers' faith is another major part of her identity. She was raised Christian. She says her relationship with God was the foundation for an event she established to create a space where she and her peers could come together in prayer, especially as youth face so many challenges here in Milwaukee. Chambers shares more with WUWM's race and ethnicity reporter, Taryn Powell.
I would say as far as the youth event, how it came to be is like that good relationship and deep relationship with God, to hear him talking to me and just my heart too. Like, God lives inside of me and he's a big person on, like, it's not like what you benefit from, it's how you could benefit others. And so that was the big thing. It's just about like, how can I advocate for youth? How can I showcase God in a time like this to give him glory and praise despite this chaotic world? So I would just say that deep relationship for me to be able to hear him, but then also like have a heart to do this.
So how did that event go?
It went amazing. Like, even down to the first people that interviewed me that day was TMJ Ford. That kind of got me excited. And then when I came early, and my stepdad, he helped me move the generator and the speaker. I said, if anything fails, I do not want this speaker system to fail. So people brought me the generator, the speaker. We were testing it. Mr. Kearney from Northcott Neighborhood House donated so many waters and sodas. My granddad was out there really early moving the coolers and stuff. So really that support even before the event was amazing. Laria, my mom's friend who I've grown closer with, was there to help me. My friend who was going to come and pray, she was like, okay, I'm here early to set up. And we just kind of had everything out. But that was like really nice. I ended up texting her saying like, thank you for that. When everybody came, I was getting interviewed a lot. And I'm like, I like this. This is very positive because I'm able to talk to people that weren't able to be here, which was really nice. But then also talking to youth and really like getting my faith out of there, because I know thousands of people watch the news and thousands of people have saw the clips. So I'm happy that I was able to inspire people through that. And then when the event started, I started off in worship. I was like, I kind of talked about the vision, and then I was like, okay, God also told me, because I'm a singer, I was like, okay, I want to figure out a way how not to turn this into a worship event, but keep it prayer too. And he was like, okay, enter my gates with thanksgiving and praise. And I was like, okay, I could sing. And so I was like, okay, guys, I'm about to sing. And they were like, okay, do you need some music? Do you need an instrument? So I'm like, no, we don't need that to worship. So then I just bust out singing a whole bunch of different songs. And then I passed the microphone to my peers that were praying, that God downloaded and said that needed to pray. We passed it around. Everybody prayed. I finished the prayer. And then we ate, we played a fun kickball game, we sat around, fellowshipped, and yeah, it was amazing.
So why is that something that the youth in Milwaukee need right now?
Yeah, this is something that God was telling me too. He was like, he's coming back soon. Like, it's time to turn back to him. And I feel like, and God told me like so many people are blaming him for what's going on and pushing farther and farther away from him. But he's like, I want to have a relationship with them. And specifically the youth, just seeing like all the violence going on with us. I was telling people this a lot of times at the event, like, we often feel like we need pastors to pray over us or adults to pray over us. But like I said, I had a realization I could pray over myself. Sometimes I'm on the phone with people and we might just pray before we get off the phone call. And I'm like, we can do this. Like, this can be an event to like inspire others to do this. And so I wanted to highlight that in the event, because I'm like, our prayers don't have to be perfect. We don't have to sound like each other. Everybody is going to talk about different things. We don't have to shout. We don't have to cry. God just wants us to have a simple conversation with him. And I just really wanted to highlight to youth that we can pray over each other and that we could also pray over ourselves too. Really encouraging people that prayer is important, because we don't have to be perfect. God wants us to come as we are, and that he hears us, and that his promises are that he will always respond.
So I want to keep talking just a little bit about what the youth in Milwaukee are experiencing. Violence, of course, we always talk about that, but what else is going on that you think people they don't know more about, or maybe not paying super close attention to?
I feel like it's like what everybody's going through. Like, it's not just like youth specific issues. Like, we're going through things a 50-year-old person could be going through. The biggest part I want to highlight are the solutions to that, about like getting to the roots. I did a presentation at my mom's job at their youth membership launch called Getting to the Roots and Giving Grace. I feel like that's a really big thing that we need for all the issues that we are dealing with. And I can still name some issues, but I feel like people deal with these things all the time, whether that's grief, whether that's homelessness, whether that's violence, whether that's abuse, emotionally, physically, spiritually. But I would just say what I keep telling people is like, giving grace is really important because you don't know what someone could be going through. I feel like also youth are neglected so much. And that's also another reason why I wanted to do the event and made sure that there was a spotlight from the news, because we're often highlighting so many of the negative things. I was like, no, you guys need to be at a positive event. The youth need to see a positive event on the news. The adults need to see a positive event on the youth, because they're often like, oh my gosh, the youth, they're doing this and that. And often not asking like, how can we help you? Why are you doing that? When was the first time you felt like you were angry? Why? How do you deal with your anger? Why do you deal with your anger like that? What's another way that you could deal with your anger like that? I feel like that's a really big thing. Getting to the roots is also not easy, because often you don't know the answers to a lot of your reflections that you may have or questions that you may be asked. But adults or other youth asking each other those questions, I feel like that can be a segue to people like giving grace and not just blaming someone. Or also that could be the start of reflection. You're like, why have I been doing that? How can I be better? I want to be better. I was just talking to my friend on the phone. She was just telling me how she wants to be better. She feels like it's always something. She was telling me how different ways how she deals with things. I didn't sit there and say, oh my gosh, why do you do that? I asked her, well, when did that start? How does that make you feel when you do that? How do you want to be better? What are some things that you want to do to be better? Instead of sharing the blame and just saying like what should be happening.
I'm glad you brought up like more conversation needs to be had about getting to the root of young folks, what they might be dealing with. What would you say to those like community organizers, politicians who say they want to help the youth? What you think they need to do differently or start doing, or what are they missing?
Having a conversation with us, pouring into our passions. I was also just at another event too. They're like, oh yeah, we need a lot of youth in this, what is it called? In this career path, there's not a lot of youth. I'm like, take them under their wing, mentor them. Come in our schools. I'm so big on coming to our schools. They often want us to come to them, but we often don't know what's out there. They're often so hopeless about Milwaukee and not being exposed to all the great things in Milwaukee. I'm like, come in our schools and talk to us. I promise you, if you pour into them, we will pour into you guys. You guys will have trust in us. We will show you our passions. We'll show you what we're great at. And so I would just say having a simple conversation and meeting us where we are, because that's also another big thing too. Like, hope needs to be instilled back into a lot of people. And that's definitely not an easy thing to do. But having that simple conversation of, what are your passions? What do you like to do? Or even talking about yourself to inspire us on what we could do, I feel like is also very important. So I would say a simple conversation can go a long way.
One of the things that stands out to me about the youth prayer event, and probably why there was so much excitement about it, is because you have a young person really spotlighting prayer and doing it all, on y'all's own. Is this something you would do again?
Yes, I definitely want to do it annually. My mom also brought up a good idea that we can have tiny events like where we pray in the beginning, then we just do like a fun kickball game, how we did at like the end, or have a football game or play volleyball, and then at the end pray. Just like in a smaller format, or just like we come together, fellowship, have food, have fun, be safe.
I want to allow you to share any final thoughts about anything that you might have.
Prayer is important in that youth can pray over youth. I feel like a word to specifically say to the youth, get around people that you can be yourself around, that you might not have to be, that you don't have to like fake around, that you could pray with, but also getting in. I wouldn't even say getting your prayer, not getting in your prayer closet, because a lot of people feel like they don't have like that great maturity yet to like, oh yeah, let me go talk to God in my prayer closet. But I feel like simply having a conversation with God anywhere you go, I feel like that's really important. Once again, does not have to be 10 minutes, does not have to be 2 minutes, can be 5-second prayer. God, please give me the strength. And he'll give it to you. I would say to the adults, continue to support even the youth that it seems like that they aren't going down the best path. Continues to support everybody. Meeting them where they are, getting a mentor, being a mentor, I feel like is very important.
That was Zoe Chambers, a Milwaukee teen who recently organized a youth prayer event. She spoke to WUWM's race and ethnicity reporter, Taryn Powell. We'll take one more break and then share how you can become a community scientist for the Wisconsin DNR. Keep listening to Lake Effect on WUWM. This is Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources is inviting Wisconsinites to report their sightings of deer and birds like turkey, ruffed grouse, and pheasant. The data helps the DNR make decisions about managing those wildlife populations. During August and September, those looking to become a community scientist can report their wildlife observations alongside DNR employees. To learn more, WUWM's Eric Vaughn Fellow Maria Peralta Ariano is joined by Wisconsin DNR data analyst Paul Frater.
We have 2 citizen science surveys available for people to participate in. The first is our Operation Deer Watch, which records deer observations. And the second is our Game Bird survey, which records observations of wild turkey, ruffed grouse, and pheasants.
So why are we surveying for these specific populations versus a wider survey for other animals that we have in the area?
Yeah, so we're interested in getting information on these species because they're all harvested species. And so that really helps us to be able to manage those populations in a sustainable way. Since we are the agency that manages the quotas and the allowable harvest, we want to make sure we have a good idea of, that we're not negatively impacting the populations.
So what do those negative impacts look like that we're trying to help limit?
Yeah, so for example, if we overharvest any one particular population of, say, turkey or ruffed grouse, for long enough, the population could decline from that. And that's something that we really want to try to avoid. We want to see either maintained or increased populations for the most part of these species.
Thank you for that. So we are asking for these surveys to be filled out between the months of August and September. Can you just kind of go into why those months and what the data is going to be used for thereafter?
Yeah, so late summer is really the ideal time for counting both deer and game birds with their offspring because the young are typically found really close to their mothers, but they're still readily distinguishable. Juveniles are quite a bit smaller than the adults. Fawn deer also still have spots to help tell them apart from adult deer. And so these characteristics really help to provide a more accurate count of juveniles to adults, which is what the surveys are intended to measure. Going back to the previous question about, I mentioned about maintaining or increasing populations. There's also certain cases where we may want to decrease populations too, like in a lot of areas we have an overabundance of deer. And so we want we may want to decrease those populations. And so having a good measure of fauna doe ratio for deer, for example, helps build our population estimates so we have a good sense of what the deer population is like in certain areas. And that'll allow us to make management decisions based on that knowledge.
When we are looking at the data in the areas of populations we might want to see increase or might want to decrease, does that influence the hunting season?
Probably not the seasons themselves. We have pretty traditionally established seasons. However, it could influence the amount of tags that we might make available for certain species. So for species like deer and turkeys, we give out a certain number of tags for each of the seasons. And so depending on what we're seeing with the populations and how the populations in particular areas are wanting to be managed, we may increase or decrease the number of tags that are available for people to harvest those animals.
How we can ensure that the data that we're receiving from the survey is reliable and accurate and properly reflects things like the species or the age that they are reporting.
Yeah, so I think the first thing to really stress is that it's important for when people are submitting observations, it's important to make sure that they're good observations. So, for instance, if you are driving 75 miles down the highway and you see a deer or a turkey standing in the ditch, that's maybe not the best observation. The best case scenario would be if you could safely stop a vehicle and really look at the individual, especially if you have binoculars and can look through binoculars. That's really helpful. But really trying to make sure that you're confident with that observation that deer or turkey or grouse does or does not have juveniles with them.
What are the current statuses of deer and game bird populations currently in Wisconsin?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for deer, it really kind of depends on where in the state you are. For much of the southern portions of the state, which so we have different deer zones. We have our farmland zones, which are mostly the agricultural areas of the state. And for much of the farmland zones, our populations are pretty high and increasing. In many cases, we have an overabundance of deer. For the more heavily forested areas of the zones, so the northern third of the state, it just kind of depends on where you are. In certain areas, there's healthy deer populations. In certain areas, there may be an overabundance in localized spots, and then in many areas, there's a low density of deer populations. For turkeys are actually doing really quite well in the state. Our last two spring turkey seasons have been the fourth and fifth highest harvests on record. Populations are expanding in the north and doing really quite well throughout the state. And as far as ruffed grouse go, there's kind of a sort of a long-term historical decline in ruffed grouse. The last 2 years, we've seen increases in our grouse drumming survey counts that we do in the spring. And so that's hopeful, but over the longer term, we're tending to see lower grouse numbers across the state.
This is a statewide initiative that we are trying to get community members to submit these observations. So why is it important to enlist the state community versus leaving this to a government entity like the DNR?
Yeah, so the DNR still does, our staff are also out there collecting these same observations and submitting them. So we have sort of two parallel tracks of this survey. We have the DNR version, and then we have the public version, which is a citizen science initiative. So we're collecting data right alongside the public, but by bolstering the number of observations, by including the public, it allows us to just get a much better idea of the juvenile to adult ratio for these different species. That helps us understand reproductive capacity for the populations of these species this year. And so it's really just a matter of increasing our confidence with the data. The more observations that we can get, the more confident that we can be in those data.
And then is there any differences in what the DNR is submitting and collecting versus what the public is submitting and collecting?
Nope, it's pretty much the exact same survey. We just ask, for the DNR version, we basically ask what their affiliation in the DNR that they are in. So whether they're wildlife or law enforcement or parks or forestry, that sort of thing. And we also have cooperating partners, so staff biologists that are in different agencies like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Forest Service. We also ask those individuals to submit observations as well as part of that survey. The other thing I wanted to reiterate too is that we want to make sure that people avoid submitting repeat observations. So if there's the same deer, the same group of turkeys that are coming into, say, your yard or in a particular field every night, just submit those observations once. We don't want people to keep resubmitting those observations.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Paul Frater is a data analyst with the Wisconsin DNR. He spoke with WUWM's Eric Vaughn Fellow, Maria Peralta Ariano, about volunteering as a community scientist. And that's Lake Effect for today. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. If you've missed any of Lake Effect, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Tomorrow on the show, we'll hear from college students who are leading environmental movements to combat climate change. Thank you so much for listening to Lake Effect today, right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.